Hello and welcome to the 11FS Spotlight Show. My name is David Breer. In this weekly show, we shine a bit of a spotlight on the best and the brightest in the tech and financial services industry to try and understand what is it that gets them going, growing, and where they really think the future of the industry will go. On today's Spotlight, I'm delighted to be joined by Vikram Srivatsaa, who is the Vice President and General Manager over at Wavemaker. Vikram, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to see you. How are you doing today?
Absolutely great. Thank you for having me, David.
Yeah, no worries at all. I mean, it's going to be a super interesting show today. What we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about Vikram's career, but also how we can really get to realize and untap that potential within the banking as a service space. There's so much happening in that market. It's so significant, globally, I think, for how financial services is going to be constructed, not only in the midterm, but very much out into the future in terms of where we're going. But maybe, Vikram, if we start with, give us the elevator pitch, give us the background for Wavemaker for anybody who hasn't heard of it, who's watching this now.
Absolutely. Wavemaker makes it easy for building financial services applications, period. We do that by providing a low-code application development platform that developers can use to very quickly compose applications. These are applications that you would use as a consumer, your mobile app, your web app, that comes from banks, financial institutions, insurers, and the like. And we do this in a way that is composable. When I say composable, you can take a lot of the out-of-the-box widgets in the low-code platform and then compose applications pretty quick. You can also take what we call as prefabs, and which is an interesting topic we should talk about later, especially in the evolution of APIs to then going to prefabs. But you can take those custom prefabricated components and then again compose those application experiences very rapidly, very simply, very easily. So really, we make it very simple, very quick, very easy for applications to come to life in the so-called Internet of Finance era. As a company, we've been around for about 9 years. We have customers in about 60 countries with about 150 employees. And Forrester recognized Wavemaker in 2019, again in 2021, for things that we do really well around mobile, around user experience, and also the inherent architecture of the platform being cloud native and API centric. So these are some tenets and some sort of, highlights of what Wavemaker brings to the table.
Very good. It's an amazing time to be doing that type of product as well. Like you say, there's a whole explosion of no code, low code capability, and actually, not only for, as you say, financial services players, but people looking to embed financial services into the mix as well. So we'll touch on that a little bit more in a second, but maybe sticking with you for a little bit. So tell us a little bit more about your role at Wavemaker and give us a bit of an understanding of your background as well, because it's when you've sort of done the things and seen the things that you've done in the industry, then this type of product sort of fits into that direction from an industry perspective. So give us your background.
So I'll give you both. I'll give you a sense of my role currently. I have a fascinating job at Wavemaker. It's really to chart the course of the company in this world, as far as banking as a service is concerned, as well as financial services in general is concerned. So really, when I say chart the course, I have the go-to-market responsibility. I have a fantastic team that works with me. There's growth, there's revenue, professional services, pre-sales. I have analyst relations. I have media and communications. I have a bunch of these, market-facing functions with me globally. And like I said, a fantastic team. Insofar as my background, I think, by training, I'm a mechanical engineer. When I think about it, I think that one thing that's always driven me is the need to be part of something very big. And secondly, the ability to then just build, right? So I'm more of a builder than a general manager, if you will, even though I carry the title of GM. So in some sense, those two have carried with me throughout my career. I just to give you a couple of examples, I was part of a company that built the very first indigenously developed and invented handheld computer out of India back in 2000 when digital transformation wasn't even a term. And the whole ethos was to sort of, bridge the digital divide. back then by having this simple portable handheld computer that could, do a bunch of things, text to speech. It had a smart card interface. You could share that with everybody. You don't need to pay for the full cost of the device and so on. Fast forward a few years later, I helped an extremely talented team of technology folks to build a Bluetooth protocol stack for ultra low power applications. In fact, the watch I'm wearing is a watch from Casio that uses that technology. So we're extremely proud of the fact that some things that we create can actually be seen in mass consumer applications. Again, a few years later, I helped incubate the Internet of Things business at a company called Mindtree, which is a $1 billion systems integrator. So I think the story of my life has been just sort of being part of something big and then trying to build towards that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I think there's a lot of people I've spoken to who've worked in, management consultancies or different sort of places, and often they're sort of moved to really get into doing something, delivering something. We always say at 11FS, this isn't an ideas game; it's an execution game. And actually, as you just described there, if you can look back on things where you're like, the work I've done has impacted these people in this way, that is really the thing that gets you a sense of achievement. I can't imagine looking back on my career and being like, I made some really nice PowerPoints. That's not something you would want to be really excited about, would you? But so what about, I guess, in that context with financial services? Because I mean, obviously, as you say, the execution is the critical piece. And is that what sort of gravitated you guys towards Bank as a Service, but also to your point on the sort of low code mentality around it, and actually the sort of prefabricated pieces that solve customers and industry problems? Tell us connect those dots for me a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a nice way that you ended the question in terms of connecting the dots, because they are all sort of, interrelated, and some of them are sort of progressive and evolutionary, right? So if you really look at, maybe the best way to explain this is in two towers. One tower is what's happening in the financial services world. We all know this. There's enough research analysis reports around the traditional model of financial services delivery from banks and financial institutions. And then, of course, the new way in which financial services is being delivered already, which is, embedded within brands and contextual experiences within brands, and then also via fintechs and so on. So I think that is one tower. And then there's the other tower where enterprise software and applications have reached a point where local platforms are increasingly becoming prevalent in the way companies build applications, because there just aren't as many developers out there to build all these applications, right? Microsoft had this data point about 50 million apps to be built in the next 5 years. Everybody has their numbers, whether the numbers are true or not. I think the bottom line is there's an explosion of apps. It's almost like what happened after the iPhone. So you have so many apps on your phone right now, but even from an enterprise standpoint with digital transformation and such, and of course the pandemic accelerating everything. So there's that whole app economy. The only solution seems to be, you have a finite set of, 11 or 12 million software developers in the world. So the only solution seems to be low code as a way of building applications, as a way of orchestrating business processes and so on and so forth. So really, these are two independent things that have been happening in the market clearly over the last 7-8 years. If you look at most of the major players in fintech today, they all started about 7-8 years ago. So clearly this has sort of come to the table. And where they started overlapping was, banks and their need to modernize, their need to face these consumer demands and deliver to those expectations needed modern systems. When I say systems is in core as well as channel, as in engagement applications. So low code, first, in terms of what we've seen, for example, in our case, we helped a Bay Area-based fintech, which provides a loan origination system to banks to be completely repurposed and modernized using our low code platform. And so basically, it originally started by talking to people who provide platforms and systems and applications of record, as well as engagement platforms for the traditional financial services domain. That's where our first place started. And so when I talked about evolutionary and progressive and connecting the dots, naturally what's happening is the world of, you can say, the modern finance, or what I'd call as the Internet of Finance, with all these APIs, where you have all these new players, naturally there's a fit for Wavemaker to build applications on top of these APIs. So clearly, in both cases, there's a need for acceleration. In both cases, there's a need to modernize. In both cases, there's a need to be very dynamic with respect to changing consumer demands and such. And of course, in the market, of course, there's tremendous competition. There's shape shifting happening all the time. So I think all of this is playing into the low code. I would say, play for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? As you say, because how much of that do you think really is sort of the industry waking up to? I mean, every bank on the planet sort of thinks they're a bit of a snowflake when it comes to, but our architecture is different and we do it in this way. And it's like, well, no, actually, there are standardized, optimized patterns for these things, and actually, financial services is late to the game when it comes to, event-driven microservices architecture. So actually bringing in standard ways of applying capability to the market really lends itself, as you say, to a low-code operation, because essentially the thing that banks are trying to get themselves to is, renovating the organization, renovating the operating model, renovating the technology stack, while they're sort of hurtling along the motorway doing it, aren't they? So it feels like a kind of a point in time, but also a mature sort of a maturization of the technology, but also almost from an emotional intelligence perspective within the organizations, almost a realization that actually, look, there are places where we need to differentiate. And there are places where actually we just need to be the best that the industry can be. And that narrative must be really, unlocking more and more opportunities for you guys.
Absolutely. So I think for a moment, if you just stay with that category of banks, which I call as, again, traditional financial services delivery, right? So I would say that maturation or maturing of their approach, just a combination of culture, processes, technology, and what have you, there's a tremendous role to play. I think one of the things that you probably have heard of, probably in the enterprise market, is this theme or this concept called composability. And composability, if you really connect the dots, composability is for an enterprise to build, just look at any enterprise. You have either you can go and buy a packaged application from SAP or what have you, or you can go and build a custom application. Composability is something in between, is the ability for you to build capabilities in blocks and keep them handy, and then mix and match, compose, configure, reconfigure in a very fluid state to go and deliver new business capability for your enterprise, right? So Gartner talks about composable enterprises, and there's a lot of things around that. What's interesting is if you look at some of the banking platform providers of the new generation, if you've heard of 10x, or if you've heard of 10x is probably in your backyard, Mambu and some of these guys, they talk about effectively the same concept, right? So in some sense, even just staying in the banking tower, in the traditional financial services tower, for us, we have a role to play insofar as, banks who adopt these kind of platforms, they still are headless. So the application, the user experience is where we play. So in some sense, we complement these kind of modern microservices-based, composable, componentized platforms that basically, if you've heard of the great unbundling, so it's the great unbundling and then the rebundling, right? So it's really, we support that whole paradigm.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? As you say, though, where does that end? Because And we'll get to sort of the customers in a second to a certain degree, because obviously, as you described, there's a complex and chaotic kind of landscape if you're a big bank. And actually, we're not talking about a single core engine. We're talking about 87 and we're talking about multiple monoliths. We're talking about different data stores. We're talking about, different silos for customer interaction and customer capability. So almost the decomposed version of that is almost impossible. I always kind of say on the subject matter is like, I don't think it's just a technology problem, because actually every layer within that technology is running at a different procurement length, is running at a different contract length. And almost what we'd be talking about is like the alignment of the moon and the stars all to come together in order to address that one problem in that one way. And that's hard, right? For a fintech, it's very different, isn't it? Because even we've with 11FS, we've built things like Metal with NatWest and Mox with Standard Chartered, which are greenfield things. So you've got the sort of beautiful sort of fresh sheet of paper where you can really put new technology in and move those things forwards. Yep. But even then, it's a challenge because it's not just a procurement thing. It becomes a religious debate about technology and everything that you kind of use there. So where are you guys aiming in that? Are you aiming at the big banks who are looking at sort of creating a new stack to rule them all? Or is it a transitionary step in terms of, tidying the house and tidying the monoliths? Or are you aiming, as you said, there's opportunities within the fintech space or even in the non-bank space where, different players, look at what Shopify have been doing, different players to stray into financial services and platforms like yours that are, low code allows them to, get into banking without having to be a bank, right?
Absolutely. And so I think there's a play in both for us, David. So if you look at what I said, I mean, it's non-trivial, just as you pointed out. It's non-trivial for banks to sort of turn on a dime, right? So I think we are seeing that banks are doing what they want. Frankly, it's not our position to pontificate about how their strategy is going to pan out. There's so much complexity, so much heritage, legacy, culture, what have you. I think where our angle on that traditional side of the market is to work with large banking software platform providers who themselves have a ton of legacy, but then they also have modern platforms that they're taking to market. So they then figure out, and for us, they deal with the complexity of whether banks are going to make that shift or not. How are they going to do it? So if they score a design win, we get to play, and we help actually build those platforms. So one of the things about Wavemaker that I did probably emphasize about earlier is we're not as much as about low code for IT applications as much as we are about low code for software platform builders, right? So we are really focused on the software platform builders. Take an example of a big three provider, let's say here in the US. They basically can build a digital engagement platform using a low code approach, which helps them deliver, first of all, the platform much faster to market. Second, it's completely modern, cloud-native, microservices-based, API-driven platform. Thirdly, banks can then customize it, extend it. They don't have to spend a lot of professional services, which is one of the things I think I wanted to point out about Wavemaker is that once you deliver something, right, a big headache for a lot of these banking software providers is customization. And this is customization outside of the core of what they provide. So just imagine your customers taking an enormous amount of time to go live. That means that you're just forever strung along without realizing revenue. So clearly helping that and moving that to a self-service model and ultimately, opening up ecosystems for them. So just imagine you have a low-code platform slapped on top of your software platform. Third parties can build applications on top of it. So that's our play in the traditional world, right? And I didn't even talk about banking as a service so far. And you brought up the examples about Shopify. And so that's really my next segment. That's really, I think where our next is as well from an evolution standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because for organizations who, this is why exactly as you say, I think low code for big banks is almost an evolutionary step. If you struggle to bring amazing engineers, it's not that somebody hasn't done the engineering, you guys have, right? But their task becomes almost an integration one rather than a creation one. And at that stage, I think the complexity of that is interesting because, really the things that big organizations really struggle with is almost sort of project mentality leads to I've delivered it, therefore it's like it now forever. And it's like, well, actually, that's not how the reality of the world works when there's, new technology coming to market and being commoditized faster than ever. What you want is, to your point around the composability of it, you want optionality, don't you? So if a new vendor for, I don't know, KYC comes along in 2 years' time and they just blow everybody else out the water, it can't be a 3-year project to change that vendor to the new one. And that's, I think, getting people into our CTO says it's great architecture is grown, it's not built. And actually those things that you keep bringing, new players coming to the market and being able to, as you say, take the pieces and compose something in a different way to fix a different problem is really where the advantage actually is. And I mean, you touch on BaaS a little bit, but where do you see that market going? Because obviously, I mean, there is a real explosion, isn't there, in terms of people who are sort of clambering, not in the BaaS market, but people who are clambering to get into financial services because they've got big communities and their brands that people trust. So it's almost a logical extension of what they're doing, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know, we can talk about it for hours, right? But I think just people seem to have woken up to the fact that you can bring financial services no matter who you are. It's really democratized. It's powerful. The world of, just imagine financial services and financial products today are software. A16Z talked about software is eating the world. I would say APIs are eating financial services. So it's ridiculous how, APIs rule the roost right now. And, as far as banking as a service is concerned, if I were to go back to one of sort of 11FS's own videos around the future of fintech, and fintech is only 1% done, or finished, right? Is really, you have this whole infrastructure play, which is very exciting. You have all kinds of companies, BaaS providers or infrastructure providers, and then you have these markets, different geographies. Then you have, consumers, you have retail banking, that is consumers, then you have SMBs and corporates and what have you. But in this infrastructure area, there's so much action, so much of, you could say, like animals in the picture. You have, people who are specialized like Plaid, who provide all this, sort of account aggregation, access to this thing. You have, KYC, you've got all that. And we feel like we are a player in that space to take things to the next level. And I'll talk a little bit about that, because I think where BaaS ends today are APIs. And what we believe with a platform like ours you could do is to ingest those APIs, integrate with them, and not only build apps fast, but you could also create these sort of sub-applications, or you can say like applets or slices of app functionality, which we call prefabs, and then sort of rapidly compose different applications. If you're familiar with Stripe Elements, that's a great example, right? Just drag and drop. So just imagine you're a brand, you want to get started with BaaS. You buy something from Marketer, let's say you buy something from Synapse, you buy something from Bond, but you want to put an app together that has a complete user journey. Just imagine if you had prefabs that integrated with these different BaaS providers' APIs, it would be super powerful for you to go to market very quick. So that's really what we're after. That's the holy grail for us.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and we've had Patrick Collinson on FinTech Insider in the past, and he said exactly that. It's like, actually, we're building blocks, and if our building blocks are the best building blocks, then engineers will choose to use ours. And actually, if you can create things in that sense, which is, these are the Lego blocks of the future. We talk about the fabric of financial services. This is the Lego blocks for the future of the financial services, essentially. I mean, where do you think that space will go? Because, arguably, each slice of banking, to your point around, disruption and the unbundling, we're seeing that not just from a, wealth management and then retail banking and SME. It's not just from a customer perspective. It's from the B2B players as well. Simon Taylor from 11FS always says it's going from, whales to schools of fish. And actually, there's schools of fish for, as you say, every different slice of what that opportunity could be. But almost the place where I really feel like the disruption is really happening is almost the business model. And actually, if you look at, when you say APIs are eating financial services, it's like actually, SaaS and SaaS players with those APIs are kind of monetizing their services in really different ways, aren't they? So, to your point earlier on, Thought Machine and 10X and, what you guys are doing and Foundry, what we're doing, and different players in the mix. Well, actually, the business model of that is changing how FIS and Jack Henry and Temenos and these guys have to think about it. And that's almost the place where it will change most, I think. The technology will continue to evolve and, will continue to evolve the agenda around it. But actually almost the traditional, once it's in and it's in forever. And in 20 years, we'll think about it again. I think that mentality is really, really shifting. And that's amazing to see, isn't it? They always sort of say the last place to change is always the business model. But really, that's where I think players like yourself and different players in the mix really are attacking it. And that's, again, choice is always the best thing in the market, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think as far as business model is concerned, like you said, it's the last thing. So frankly speaking, we are just, anything that I say, I'll probably get wrong. So, right. I mean, it's just going to absolutely evolve. We just don't know who's going to, and I think even in terms of the ecosystem, I think the first order of business in this space is the ability to be nimble around the ecosystem. I mean, like I've seen big players in banking and financial services collaborate with smaller, nimble competitors. So, first of all, I mean, let alone, talk about business models, somebody has to really sort of first get their head around, how do I work with them, right? So I think,
Sure.
It's fascinating to see. I have companies who basically have come up with system level, core level APIs, but they basically then want to work with a third party who provides experience APIs because they just feel like they can't go to market as fast. So they're working with their competitors. There are banks who want to become BaaS providers, right? And then there are companies that actually provide core banking platforms for them to become BaaS providers. The whole shape has started to shift in terms of, who's a provider, who's an infrastructure player, who's a utility, who's the end customer owner, So it's pretty fascinating to see. And I think, like I said, I'd be very humble about this. I don't know how these business models will evolve. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? We often say, ain't it great time to work in financial services? Like, can you imagine like 50 years ago, the level of change was just so slow, like the amount of disruption that's really happening in FS now, and not just surface level, but like through all of the different layers, through all of the different impacts. It's a great time to be doing what we do, eh?
Absolutely, it is. I mean, fascinated to be here.
So on that note, and I'm afraid we're coming to the end of our time, unfortunately, but what would be really good to get an understanding of is we always like to kind of get a view. There's a lot of people who watch this, the people who listen to FinTech Insider, the people who watch this show are really a range from new people wanting to get into the industry to CEOs of businesses who have been in it for a long time. But it's great to always have people with your experience on and go like, what advice would you give your younger self? Like, what would you do differently? How would you think differently about your journey? So what would be the advice you give to your younger self?
I would say, if I were to just say younger self, let's say 25 years ago, I was probably close to 20. So at that time, the world was totally different. So the advice I would give to my younger self at that time would be to just be more patient and learn. Patience is a virtue that I feel like, unfortunately, you have to get beaten many times on the head before you develop that sort of virtue. But I would say the advice I would give to my younger self, if I was young right now, at that age right now, is to just think like an entrepreneur. I mean, it doesn't matter what level in the company you are, whether you're an engineer, you're a marketer, or you're a salesperson, just think like an entrepreneur. Think like where the market is heading, sort of what, because I've seen the beautiful thing I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years is that, companies sprout from anywhere. I've seen founders of some of the most amazingly valued companies, and they were non-existent 5 years ago. So really, I think, the best advice I can give myself if I was young was just think like an entrepreneur.
Sounds good. Yeah, always seek that edge, seek that advantage. There's always an opportunity, isn't there? So, just before we wrap up, then, what's next for Wavemaker? I mean, this is a huge industry. There's all these different types of changes happening. What's on the horizon for you guys?
A lot of it is going to be revealed later this year, David. And I'll just say this. I think for us, as I sort of pointed out earlier, the holy grail is really to build that business for helping composability, taking the API world as it is right now, using the easy button that Wavemaker is, and then transforming that API world to more like a prefab world where, we could basically help bring more Stripe elements to the market, more Stripe-like elements to the market, so that, you basically then have, this proliferation happen very quickly. The second thing that we are really looking to do is in this BaaS infrastructure domain, you will have a lot of players, but I think some shakeout will happen. And I think, fintechs and brands are looking for the ability to work with different BaaS providers, to be able to work across their products, across geographies, across capabilities. So I think one of the other things that we're looking to do is to work with, more than a few BaaS providers to bring that capability to end customers.
Fantastic. It's going to be a busy time. Well, you'll have to come back and talk to us when you go public with all of the news as it sort of develops and shapes out then. But it's been lovely talking to you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I am going to have to wrap up. But and sadly, that does come to the end of the show. Vikram, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people learn a little bit more about you and all the good work that you guys are doing?
Just go to wavemaker.com. That's wavemaker, one single word.com.
Fantastic. All right, guys, that's all the time that we have for you this week. Make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn so you never miss an episode like this again. Also, if you want to head over to the 11FS YouTube channel, you can get all of the back log of episodes and everything that's there as well. Hope you've enjoyed this show. Have a great week, everybody. Goodbye.